Commander Sarah Chen had seen enough diplomatic disasters to recognize the warning signs, and the tension crackling through Firebase Meridian's command center felt like the moments before a plasma conduit exploded. She stood at the observation deck, watching the latest in humanity's long line of optimistic negotiators face off against Commander Vexaria of the Ethereal Coalition, whose elongated ears seemed to twitch with barely contained irritation every time the human opened his mouth. "Let me understand this correctly," Vexaria said, her melodic voice carrying the kind of patience that preceded either enlightenment or execution. "You wish us to believe that this time will be different. That humans have suddenly discovered the concept of honor after centuries of broken promises and abandoned treaties." Kaylin Martinez, the negotiator in question, leaned forward across the holographic conference table with the kind of earnest intensity that made Sarah want to either applaud or hide behind her coffee dispenser. The man had arrived 3 days ago with credentials from the diplomatic corps and the unsettling confidence of someone who genuinely believed he could talk his way out of an interstellar war. "I'm not asking you to believe in humanity's collective honor," he replied, his words carrying the weight of conviction that either indicated deep wisdom or spectacular delusion. "I'm asking you to believe in mine. I'm prepared to stake everything on this negotiation succeeding." Sarah snorted quietly into her synthetic coffee, a beverage that tasted like optimism filtered through recycled disappointment. "Everything," he says. Easy to promise everything when you've never seen what everything looks like with plasma burns and alien autopsy reports attached. The command center's quantum displays painted the walls with tactical information that told a story Sarah preferred not to think about too carefully. Ethereal Coalition forces massed along the outer rim territories, their bioships grown rather than built, pulsing with organic energy signatures that made human sensors twitch nervously. Firebase Meridian represented humanity's forward diplomatic position, a gleaming testament to their commitment to peaceful resolution that also happened to be armed with enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. "Your individual honor," Vexaria repeated, rising from her seat with fluid grace that made Sarah think of predators deciding whether their prey was worth the effort of hunting. "Forgive my skepticism, Negotiator Martinez, but individual promises from humans have historically proven as reliable as solar flares during navigation season." Kaylin's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Then test me. Give me a chance to prove that some humans understand the difference between words and commitment." "Oh, wonderful," Sarah muttered, checking the security feeds that showed alien and human military personnel maintaining polite distances while fingering weapons that could reduce the firebase to constituent atoms. Nothing good ever starts with "test me" in diplomatic situations. Next he'll be challenging her to single combat or offering to juggle live antimatter as a show of good faith. Vexaria's ears, those distinctive elongated features that marked her species with an almost ethereal beauty, tilted forward with what Sarah had learned to recognize as dangerous interest. The alien commander had spent 18 months at Firebase Meridian, long enough for Sarah to understand that Vexaria's moments of curiosity usually preceded someone having a very bad day. "Testing," Vexaria mused, walking around the holographic display with steps that seemed to make the very air shimmer. "An interesting proposition. But what manner of test would satisfy decades of accumulated distrust, Negotiator Martinez?" The quantum communication array chimed softly, indicating incoming priority messages from both human and alien command structures. Sarah glanced at the data streams flowing across her peripheral displays, noting increased military activity on both sides of the disputed border. Time was running out for diplomatic solutions, and everyone in the command center knew it. "Whatever test you devise," Kaylin said, his eyes never leaving Vexaria's face, "I'll meet it. If proving my commitment to peace requires personal sacrifice, then that's what I'll give." Sarah felt her stomach drop into somewhere around her boots, a sensation she'd learned to associate with moments when the universe decided to become unnecessarily complicated. She'd seen enough military disasters to recognize the exact moment when reasonable people started making unreasonable decisions, usually right before everything caught fire and began screaming. "Personal sacrifice," Vexaria repeated, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies designed to make humans uncomfortable. "You speak of sacrifice as if you understand its true meaning. I understand that peace between our species is worth more than my comfort, my safety, or my life, Kalen replied, his words falling into the command center's recycled air like stones dropped into still water. If that's what it takes to prevent this war, then I'm prepared to pay that price. Vexaria stopped her circling, her unusual eyes, larger than human normal, with pupils that seemed to catch and hold light in ways that suggested depth beyond the merely physical. Fixing on Kalen with an intensity that made Sarah's tactical instinct start screaming warnings about predator-prey dynamics and the inadvisability of challenging apex beings to contests involving personal welfare. 5 days into the negotiations, Sarah had consumed enough synthetic stimulants to power a small reconnaissance probe and developed a nervous tic that involved checking weapons readiness every 17 minutes. The command center had become a theater of diplomatic tension where every conversation carried the weight of potential genocide, and Kalen's increasingly passionate presentations about human-alien cooperation were starting to affect even Vexaria's carefully maintained emotional barriers. The shared technology initiatives alone would revolutionize both our civilizations, Kalen explained, gesturing toward holographic displays showing proposed fusion reactors that combined human engineering with ethereal bioneural interfaces. Imagine spacecraft that grow stronger through experience, medical systems that adapt to individual genetic patterns, communication networks that operate on quantum empathy rather than mere data transmission. Vexaria leaned back in her chair, her elongated ears twitching in what Sarah had learned to interpret as either deep concentration or barely restrained homicidal impulses. Your proposals assume a level of trust that has never existed between our species, Negotiator Martinez. You speak of sharing technologies that could be weaponized, of opening our most guarded secrets to beings who have historically used every advantage for conquest. Because we've never had a reason to trust each other, Kalen countered, his voice carrying the kind of fervent conviction that made Sarah want to either nominate him for sainthood or schedule a psychiatric evaluation. Every interaction between humans and ethereals has been mediated by fear, by the assumption that cooperation means vulnerability. What if we chose differently? Sarah monitored the quantum communication feeds, noting increased chatter from both human and ethereal command structures. Fleet movement suggested that military leaders on both sides were preparing for the negotiations to fail, positioning forces for a conflict that would probably render the question of trust permanently academic. Choose differently, Vexaria repeated, her voice carrying those unsettling harmonics that seemed to bypass human hearing and resonate directly in the nervous system. You make it sound simple, as if centuries of warfare could be resolved through optimistic thinking and good intentions. Not simple, Kalen said, moving closer to the conference table with the kind of determined energy that made Sarah think of guided missiles homing in on targets. Difficult. Dangerous. Requiring sacrifice from both sides. But possible, if we're willing to risk everything for the chance of something better. The word everything seemed to hang in the command center's recycled atmosphere like a challenge, and Sarah noticed the way Vexaria's pupils dilated slightly whenever Kalen used terms like sacrifice and commitment. Ethereal physiology was still largely mysterious to human science, but Sarah's tactical experience suggested she was witnessing someone wrestling with concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. You speak of sacrifice with remarkable frequency, Vexaria observed, rising from her seat and beginning the slow circling movement that seemed to be her species' equivalent of pacing. Tell me, Negotiator Martinez, what exactly are you prepared to sacrifice for this hypothetical peace? Kalen's answer came without hesitation, delivered with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that made Sarah's combat instinct start composing resignation letters. Anything. My career, my safety, my life if necessary. Peace between our species is worth more than any individual existence. Wonderful, Sarah muttered, updating her personal log with observations about the correlation between diplomatic idealism and statistical probability of requiring emergency medical intervention. Next he'll be volunteering for experimental surgery or offering to test alien atmospheric compatibility with his own respiratory system. The holographic displays shifted to show recent intelligence reports about border skirmishes, incidents where nervous patrol crews had opened fire on shadows and misunderstood sensor readings. Each confrontation brought both species closer to the kind of full-scale conflict that would make the previous century's wars look like minor disagreements about resource allocation. "Your hypothetical willingness to die for peace is touching," Vexaria said, her tone carrying the kind of sharp edge that suggested she was testing the limits of human sincerity. "But death is easy, Negotiator Martinez. Living with the consequences of your choices, maintaining commitment when enthusiasm fades and reality proves more complex than ideology, that requires a different kind of courage." Kalen stopped moving, his expression shifting into something that combined determination with what Sarah could only describe as dangerous serenity. "Then test my living courage, Commander. Give me a chance to prove that my commitment extends beyond words and good intentions." The quantum communication array chimed with increasing urgency, priority messages flooding in from fleet commands, colonial governors, and military leaders who were losing patience with diplomatic solutions. Sarah glanced at the tactical displays, noting the positioning of forces that could turn the Firebase Meridian sector into a debris field within hours if negotiations collapsed. Testing courage, Vexaria mused, her circling bringing her close enough to Kalen that Sarah could see the way both beings seemed to exist in a bubble of tension that excluded everything else in the command center. An interesting concept. But what manner of test would satisfy your apparent need to transform abstract principles into concrete action? Sarah felt the familiar sensation of events spinning beyond anyone's control, the moment when carefully planned diplomatic procedures gave way to individual decisions that would echo across star systems and determine whether entire civilizations lived or died. She began running preliminary calculations on evacuation procedures, because experience had taught her that when idealistic humans started volunteering for unspecified tests involving alien concepts of courage, the smart money bet on needing emergency transportation away from whatever was about to happen. The emergency session convened at 0347 hours, which Sarah knew from experience was the optimal time for making catastrophically poor decisions under pressure. The command center buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or spectacular military disasters, while holographic displays painted the walls with tactical information that suggested both human and ethereal fleets were approximately 6 hours away from turning diplomacy into archaeology. "The Ethereal High Command has issued an ultimatum," Vexaria announced, her elongated ears pressed flat against her skull in what Sarah had learned to recognize as either extreme stress or preparation for violence. "They demand concrete proof of human commitment to peace, or they will authorize preemptive strikes against your outer colonies within the next solar cycle." Kalen stood at the center of the storm with the kind of calm that made Sarah think of Eye of Hurricane metaphors and other phenomena that preceded everything getting violently rearranged. What kind of proof would satisfy them? "That's where things get interesting in the traditional Chinese curse sense of the word," Sarah interjected, pulling up files from the Firebase's xenological database. "Apparently, the Ethereal Coalition has a charming cultural tradition called the Trial of Burning Resolve, which involves proving dedication to a cause by walking through a field of plasma fire that can reduce organic matter to component molecules." Vexaria's expression shifted into something that combined embarrassment with what might have been growing horror. "The trial is an ancient ceremonial practice. It has never been attempted by a non-ethereal being. The physiological requirements alone." "Are you telling me," Kalen said with the kind of focused intensity that made Sarah want to hide behind blast-resistant furniture, "that your superiors want me to prove human commitment by undergoing a trial that might kill me?" "The trial doesn't might kill you," Sarah corrected, accessing more detailed files that made her stomach perform creative gymnastics. "According to these specifications, the plasma field operates at temperatures that would vaporize human tissue in approximately 37 seconds. The only reason ethereals can survive it is because of specialized bioneural adaptations that humans definitively do not possess." The quantum communication array continued its urgent chiming, priority messages flooding in from both sides of the potential conflict. Fleet commanders demanded status updates, colonial governors requested evacuation timelines, and political leaders offered increasingly creative suggestions for resolving the crisis that ranged from immediate surrender to preemptive nuclear strikes. "The trial arena is located in the Firebase's ceremonial sector," Vexaria explained, her voice carrying the kind of reluctance that suggested she was beginning to understand the magnitude of what her superiors had demanded. It consists of a crystalline chamber surrounded by plasma field generators that create an energy barrier approximately 50 meters in length. Participants must cross the field without protective equipment to demonstrate absolute commitment to their declared cause. Kaylin nodded as if she'd just described the weather rather than a potentially lethal ordeal designed by beings whose concept of reasonable testing procedures apparently included immolation as a standard feature. How long do I have to prepare? You're not seriously considering this, Sarah said, abandoning diplomatic protocol in favor of basic sanity preservation. This isn't a test, it's assisted suicide with ceremonial overtones. Even if by some miracle you survived the plasma field, the radiation exposure alone would require medical intervention that we don't have the technology to provide. The holographic displays shifted to show technical specifications for the trial arena, a magnificent structure of bio-grown crystal and energy manipulation systems that looked like something designed by beings who considered physics more of a suggestion than a law. Plasma field generators surrounded a central pathway that glowed with the kind of light that made human eyes water and nervous systems file formal complaints. I have to do this, Kaylin said, his voice carrying the kind of finality that made Sarah think of last wills and testaments. If I refuse, both our species go to war. If I die in the attempt, at least it might prove that some humans are capable of genuine sacrifice for peace. Vexaria's ears twitched rapidly, a nervous behavior Sarah had never observed before. Negotiator Martinez, you must understand, when I suggested testing your commitment, I never intended. The High Command chose this trial because they believed no human would be foolish enough to attempt it. Then they're about to learn something interesting about human foolishness, Kaylin replied, his expression shifting into the kind of determined serenity that historically preceded people doing things that violated multiple laws of physics and common sense. When does the trial begin? Sarah checked the chronometer displays, noting the countdown timers that measured fleet approach vectors and ultimatum deadlines in units that suggested the universe had developed a twisted sense of humor about timing. According to the ceremonial protocols, trials must commence at dawn to ensure proper energy resonance with local stellar radiation. That gives us approximately 4 hours to prepare for what is statistically certain to be a very brief and educational demonstration of human combustion physics. The command center fell into the kind of silence that preceded either enlightenment or disaster, while 3 beings from 2 different species contemplated the reality that interstellar peace might depend on one man's willingness to walk voluntarily into fire that could reduce him to constituent atoms before he completed his 3rd step. Dawn on Firebase Meridian painted the sky in shades of copper and regret, while the trial arena hummed with energy that made the air itself taste of ozone and impending catastrophe. Sarah stood at the observation platform, surrounded by human and ethereal military personnel who had gathered to witness what would either be history's greatest diplomatic gesture or its most spectacular failure, depending on how long Kaylin lasted before undergoing spontaneous molecular reorganization. The arena stretched before them like a crystalline cathedral designed by beings whose aesthetic sensibilities included, potentially lethal, as a fundamental design principle. Plasma field generators lined the ceremonial pathway, their bio-grown surfaces pulsing with contained energy that distorted local space-time and made Sarah's tactical displays throw error messages every 30 seconds. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings whose gender classifications exceed human linguistic capabilities, Sarah announced through the comm system, we are about to witness either the greatest act of diplomatic courage in recorded history, or the most educational demonstration of plasma physics ever conducted with a volunteer subject. I'm honestly not sure which outcome terrifies me more. Vexaria stood at the arena's edge, her elongated ears trembling with what Sarah now recognized as barely contained emotional distress. The alien commander's usual composed authority had cracked somewhere during the night, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic mixed with profound regret. Negotiator Martinez, she said, her melodic voice carrying harmonics that seemed designed to bypass human hearing and resonate directly in the soul, you must understand, this trial was never meant to be attempted. It was chosen precisely because no human would be capable of surviving it. Kaylin approached the arena's entrance with steady steps, having spent the pre-dawn hours removing all protective equipment in accordance with trial protocols. His bare feet made no sound on the crystalline surface, and his expression carried the kind of serene determination that made Sarah think of religious martyrs and other individuals whose commitment to abstract principles exceeded their attachment to continued existence. "I understand," he replied, pausing at the threshold where normal atmosphere met the plasma field's edge. "But sometimes the impossible is the only option that leads anywhere worth going." "Oh, wonderful," Sarah muttered into her comm unit. "He's quoting philosophy at the energy field that's about to convert him into free-floating atoms. This is definitely going to end well for everyone involved." The plasma field activated with a sound like reality tearing along poorly designed seams, creating a barrier of coherent energy that glowed with light painful to observe directly. Sarah's instruments registered temperatures that would vaporize most known materials, radiation levels that violated several laws of safe exposure, and energy densities that made her want to file formal complaints with whatever cosmic authority was responsible for designing trials that included immolation as standard procedure. "Kaelin," Vexaria said, her voice cracking with something that sounded like desperation, "please, there must be another way to prove." He stepped into the fire. The plasma field embraced him like a living thing, energy cascading across his skin in patterns that should have reduced him to component particles within seconds. Instead, he continued walking, each footstep deliberate and unwavering despite the obvious agony etched across his features. Sarah watched through sensors that registered biological functions she didn't want to think about too carefully, noting cardiac stress levels that suggested his body was performing miracles of endurance that violated several medical textbooks. "How is he still moving?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the plasma field's continuous roar. "According to every calculation I've run, he should have achieved complete molecular dissociation approximately 47 seconds ago." Vexaria's eyes had gone wide with something that transcended mere surprise and entered territory that might have been all mixed with horror. "The trial responds to absolute commitment," she said, her words carrying the weight of ancient knowledge that suggested she was witnessing something unprecedented in ethereal history. "Those who enter with complete dedication to their cause find strength beyond normal physical limitations." Kaelin reached the halfway point, his bare feet leaving glowing prints on crystalline surfaces that registered temperatures hot enough to melt most metals. His pace never wavered, his expression never changed from that terrible serene determination, even as Sarah's medical scanners registered physiological stress that should have resulted in immediate unconsciousness followed by rapid death. "This is insane," she broadcast to the assembled observers, her voice pitched higher than usual as stress hormones performed creative chemistry experiments with her nervous system. "He's walking through energy that could power a small city, and he's doing it barefoot like he's strolling through a particularly warm garden. I don't know whether to nominate him for the highest diplomatic honors or have him committed for evaluation by xenopsychology specialists." The crowd of military personnel had fallen into absolute silence, humans and ethereals alike watching with the kind of fascination reserved for witnessing the impossible become routine. Some of the ethereal observers had begun exhibiting behaviors Sarah didn't recognize, their elongated ears pressed flat against their skulls while their eyes tracked Kaelin's progress with expressions that suggested they were watching their fundamental assumptions about reality undergo systematic revision. As Kaelin approached the final stretch of the trial, Vexaria's composure finally shattered completely. "Stop," she cried, her voice carrying harmonics that made the plasma field itself seem to waver. "I never wanted you to actually, I thought you would refuse, that you would prove my cynicism correct. I never wanted to watch you die for principles I was too afraid to believe in." But Kaelin continued forward, his final steps carrying him through the plasma field's exit where he collapsed onto cool crystalline surfaces, his body steaming from energies that had somehow failed to destroy him. Sarah's medical scanners registered life signs that defied explanation, while the assembled observers, human and alien alike, stared in stunned silence at a man who had just proven that some commitments transcended the boundaries of species, physics, and reasonable expectations for diplomatic protocol. Vexaria knelt beside him, her elongated ears trembling as she realized that her challenge had transformed both their species' relationship with courage and her own understanding of what humans might be capable of achieving when they decided that some principles were worth any price.